Does your camp suspect anything, Martina? Well, intel suggests... She trailed off. They think something's up, but they don't know what. Only rumors, whispers. Ricky and Benika nodded. They all felt a low rumble, chitter-chatter. Something that was normally calm, peaceful, harmless, nomadic, independent, solitary. But it was getting pissed off. Very pissed off. If there was an imagined green hue before, it was turning to a dull brown, and it felt horrible. Ricky and Benika continued staring at it while Martina skipped off, pointing in even more spots. Here and here and here. We'll need lots, okay? Next morning. Martina brought some people with her the next morning through Ricky and Benika's area. They didn't say much, only nodded. There wasn't specifically mistrust, but it was more tense than it probably should have been. They were heavily armed, but did seem to relax a little bit once actually seeing Benika and Ricky face to face for the first time. They passed through several more miles to the lake and launched their drone. Ricky asked if he could watch, and they seemed to look down on him, but didn't say no. Ricky didn't mind being passively discounted. He was used to it. Benika stayed behind, as she didn't like them for several reasons. Ricky suspected, though, she wasn't very far off and was covering him. Nothing like the warm embrace of being covered by a sniper who cares deeply about your safety, after all. The drone launched and seemed to have really good range. It was some kind of custom drone hand-built by the drone girl that passed through months earlier. Ricky didn't know what they traded it for, but he suspected it was worth a decent amount. He also imagined every stronghold having one of these, and that it'd be a really great asset. It'd take a lot to cross this huge lake, even more to go around it. It'd be dangerous, and nobody could afford to even lose a single person at this point. The drone was significantly safer, plus everything could be recorded for rock-solid intel. The drone flew really far away, but the guys had a really strong base station they set up. He was using a ham band and had a heavy-duty battery and a rolling box. It had other things in the box, too, necessary for the drone's operation, but Ricky didn't want to seem too interested. The drone reached its maximum safest range as the alarm started going off. They'd have to review the footage later because it wasn't a model that could beam back footage. The alarm stopped going off, but they set the controls now. Ricky heard them talking about how it could automatically fly back to them, so it's probably what they were doing. About 20 minutes later, the drone came back and landed next to them. They picked it up and said they'd share the information if there was anything to report, and thanked Ricky for taking care of the area. He thanked him back, but they were already on their way. Martina seemed to be ignoring him, but he understood why. Once they were out of sight, Ricky went to go find Benika. He walked for 20 feet or so and couldn't hear her anywhere. Seconds later, she gracefully flipped out of a tree and landed on the ground. He smiled at her and she smacked him on the shoulder. They walked back quietly to the little fort they'd been making. There were some fruits and vegetables waiting for them on their park-style bench with a note. Don't forget to save the seeds. Thanks for everything. The note was unsigned. The food smelled great with rich and distinct aromas. Ricky and Benika ate the fresh fruits and vegetables and took the seeds and put them in a cut-up milk carton they'd found with some dirt. Ricky had found some heavy plastic sheet wrap and was going to make them a greenhouse so they could keep growing throughout the winter. Even babysitting the little seeds helped a lot to get them that much closer for the next spring. Also, he remembered it was about time to plant the fall harvest. Ricky was having a hard time thinking that far ahead, though, when it felt like something horrible was looming barely over the horizon. He tried to get some more gardening and scavenging done, but kept looking east. He felt something over there, something massive and noisy and horrible. Ricky looked down and there was a spider making a web. Ricky did his best to work around it. He felt like it smiled up at him, and he smiled back and then tried to keep working. Before long, it was dark and time to crawl inside the hidey hole. There was a rat somewhere complaining about a rolling empty bottle over a bucket of water, located west of their location. Ricky reminded them all to leave the west alone, because there's much bigger things to be concerned about. There were lots of new rats that were not as disciplined and that were still learning the way. Ricky did his best to convince them to form up along the south. Within a few hours, they reported that the black rats were forming along the north. Seemed like Benika had a similar idea. Night time. Ricky and Benika stood at the water's edge, staring into a brown and red abyss across the huge lake. Before long, Martina was in the background, hopping around, pointing at things. Here, and here, and here. She was nervous, but didn't know what else to do. She bounced around for the area for over an hour before calming down and hanging out at the lake with Ricky and Benika. For once she was quiet. It was quite a while before she spoke. I heard the people in the town talking where they thought I couldn't hear. She paused for a while and she didn't want to say the next words. They said the ground was moving and that the vegetation in the distance was all gone. Nobody said anything for a while, then she continued. Guys, should we be worried? You two are gonna stay, aren't you? You said you'd help with the bugs. Benika didn't know what to say, and finally Ricky spoke. Well, I worked hard on this place, and I'm tired of everything trying to force me out of where I want to live. That seemed to hit a nerve with Benika, who had obviously tried to force him out of his sewer home years earlier before the flood finally did the job that she couldn't. Benika winked out without a word and left Ricky standing there with Martina. Martina grabbed Ricky's hand. You aren't leaving, are you? Ricky steeled himself. No way. They stood there together and waited for the sunlight. Chapter 22. The Ugly Truth. Next morning. Ricky woke up and Benika was gone. He couldn't sense her or the black rats anywhere. It was lamentable, but not regrettable. The truth was the truth, and sometimes it was painful. He lost before, and grief was only an old friend. Ricky got up and looked at his chamomile and lavender, taking some of the extra pieces off the plants carefully and stuffing them in his pockets. Away he went to the south, to a perimeter his brown rats had set up. They were chattering non-stop all morning about new crunchy green insects, and quite the decent number. Where Ricky's rat population was in the low thousands before, they had been quite content and expanded into the tens of thousands. Ricky'd never seen a locust swarm up close, but he'd heard about it on the Nature Channel way back when. They were fairly unstoppable, but he was willing to give it a chance. His little rat buddies could eat damn near anything, and Ricky didn't want to think about it if he'd finally saved up all the crops only to have these insects eat all the crops that were finally producing properly. To get to the front line, Ricky had to walk by bees happily buzzing, fixing the plants. It made him smile. Then he'd walk by mosquitoes in their little swarm bubbles, the good ones making sure the bad ones stopped spreading diseases. The mosquitoes and their eggs transmitting the cures on top of that for both waterborne and bloodborne disease and parasites. Out towards the edge, he found functioning apple trees and pear trees, and he loaded up his bag. The cherry trees had already got picked clean by the birds, which Ricky thought was fine. The tiny flying chickens had to eat also. Eventually there'd be enough cherry trees to where the birds couldn't eat them all. Then they could share. Then maybe Ricky could get some blueberries also. The thought made Ricky laugh. He'd have to wait until winter probably, dig up his own and take it back and put nets on it. Birds could eat a lot of blueberries, Ricky imagined. With that, Ricky arrived to the front lines. The rats were everywhere, munching on what could have only been the edge of their numbers. The locusts' numbers. He felt the wind gently push towards him, and in the far distance saw a huge ball, 20 stories high, roll what was probably about 100 yards back and then flump down. Already he could hear the munching, gnawing, and scratching of their legs together and the flapping of their undersized wings. Ricky called all the rats that he could to him that might have been lingering. He had to meet up with them when they hit the ground, otherwise the locusts would jump right over them, and he wouldn't even get a chance to do damage to them.